Jessica Lange and Sam Shepard never married despite being together for 27 years. People assumed it was romantic. The truth was messier. There were affairs they both accepted. There was drinking that poisoned everything. There were letters he wrote, confessing how badly he kept destroying what they built. When she finally left in 2009, she said she chose herself. But what does that actually mean when you've loved someone for 3 decades? At 76, she's explaining what really pushed her to walk away. And it's not what anyone expected. Jessica Lange came into the world on April 20th, 1949, in Cloquet, Minnesota, the third of 4 children. And almost from the start, her life felt like it was in motion. Her father kept switching jobs, so the family kept switching towns, drifting from Duluth to Cloquet, and then to other small places scattered across Minnesota. Each move came so quickly that she never quite had time to settle before they packed again. She later said they lived like gypsies, and when you look at how often they moved, it starts to make sense. By the time she reached Cloquet High School and graduated in 1966, she had already passed through several schools, always trying to find her place before the ground shifted again. That restlessness shaped her, pulling her between a craving for freedom and a quiet wish for stability. It followed her into adulthood. It lingered in her relationship with Sam Shepard. It lived inside her long before she became the actress the world would know. Even though her childhood felt uncertain, it gave her a sharp curiosity and a flexible way of moving through any situation. Qualities that later helped her survive in a profession where everything changes fast. Her roots were woven from different places, and they blended into her life without her even realizing how much they meant. Her mother came from Finnish ancestry, while her father was half German and half Dutch. Growing up in a working-class Midwestern home meant she learned about resilience from one side and quiet strength from another. And she watched practical habits from her German and Dutch background slip into the rhythm of her home. It was a mix that felt natural to her. Later, when she stepped into Hollywood's bright lights, the contrast between her grounded upbringing and the glamorous world around her only made her hold on to her roots more tightly. Even after fame, she would return to Minnesota again and again, as if the place helped her breathe. Her heritage pulled her back toward the past, but it also helped her understand her place in a much bigger world. In 1967, when she won a scholarship to study art and photography at the University of Minnesota, it seemed like everything was finally slowing down. She entered that fall with a dream of painting, but her heart still carried the same restless movement she had lived with her whole life. And during her first year, something shifted again. She met Paco Grande, a Spanish photographer visiting the university, and suddenly the idea of staying in one place felt impossible. She fell for him quickly. His stories, his travels, his sense of freedom all stirred something in her. Within months, she walked away from her scholarship and left school behind to follow Paco. Their journey took them across the country and then across the ocean. It was the moment she chose adventure instead of structure, and that choice opened the path that eventually led her toward acting. The university had been a doorway, but it was the world beyond it that taught her who she was becoming. This same restless pulse kept shaping her life, especially when she fell into a long relationship with Sam Shepard years later. Moving became part of how they lived. They stayed in Virginia for a while, then drifted to New Mexico, later to Minnesota, and eventually to New York. They never stayed anywhere long because staying still felt too close to losing themselves. She often said she carried her father's habit of moving on, and it made settling down difficult. Shepard understood that urge because he felt it too. Their nearly 30-year relationship rose and dipped with that tension. They loved deeply, but they also drifted, sometimes together and sometimes apart, always pulled by the same wide hunger for movement that shaped her childhood. Jessica's life veered again in the spring of 1968 when she met Paco Grande. She was 19 and he was 24, and something about his energy made the world outside Minnesota look bigger and brighter. She saw him as her way out, and she grabbed the chance to leave. Soon they were traveling in a microbus across the United States and Mexico, living on beaches and scraping by however they could. The life was wild and far from safe. In 1970, Paco tried to smuggle 40 boxes of marijuana on a flight to Mexico. The plan collapsed when he and the pilot passed out from lack of oxygen mid-air, and the emergency landing that followed felt like something ripped from a movie. Their time together also brought them face to face with drug smugglers, blues musicians, strangers, with stories that echoed through late nights, and even a toothless street peddler in Spain who joined their travels for a short while. Those years were rough, unpredictable, and raw, and they left a mark on Jessica's sense of courage and creativity. After that chaotic stretch, Jessica and Paco married in July 1970 at her parents' home in Minnesota. The wedding felt quiet compared to the life they had been living. Soon they moved to Paris, and everything shifted again. Jessica put aside her art studies and turned toward performing. She learned mime under Etienne Decroix and danced at the Opéra Comique. Paco's health began to fail not long after, as retinitis pigmentosa slowly stole his vision. She supported him through it, while also starting to build her own future. By the early 1970s, she was taking acting classes in New York, and the strain on their marriage grew as their paths drifted apart, even though they stayed legally tied. As her fame rose in the late 1970s, the marriage finally started to break. She was still legally married to Paco when she began a relationship with director Bob Fosse during the making of All That Jazz in 1979. That relationship burned hot and carried its own secrets. Soon, she also entered a long relationship with Russian ballet dancer Mikhail Baryshnikov, and in 1981, they had a daughter named Alexandra. The attention surrounding her career and personal life only made the cracks wider. Paco, facing blindness and a life far removed from what they once had, felt himself growing more isolated, while Jessica kept moving forward. Their divorce became final in 1982, after 12 years of marriage. She was ordered to pay a significant alimony settlement, large enough that many believed it gave Paco the financial stability he had lacked. Even with the bitterness of their breakup, she insisted there was no resentment. They stayed friends despite everything. The divorce closed the only marriage she ever had. After that, she chose never to marry again, focusing instead on her children and the work that kept pulling her forward. In 1973, before most of this even unfolded, Jessica had been waiting tables at the Lion's Head Tavern in New York City, sharing an apartment with Jerry Hall and Grace Jones. It was a strange mix of poverty, ambition, and possibility. Fashion illustrator Antonio Lopez noticed her then and brought her to Wilhelmina Models, where she modeled for a short period. 2 years later, in 1975, producer Dino De Laurentiis wanted a fresh face for his King Kong remake. After her screen test, Jessica won the part. She was 27 when the movie came out in 1976, and it became the 5th highest-grossing film of that year. She won the Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. Her debut looked like the start of something huge, but the praise wasn't universal. Critics tore into her performance, calling her a pretty face without the depth needed for the role. The harsh reviews sent her into depression, and she pulled away from Hollywood for 3 years. She trained hard during that time because she wanted to prove she could act, really act, beyond what anyone assumed based on her looks. When she returned, she faced another long struggle. Directors still saw her as a model, not an actress. She had to fight for roles that let her show her range. Those years were heavy, but she kept going. Eventually, she earned 2 Academy Awards, one for her role in Tootsie in 1982 and another for Blue Sky in 1994. The next year became unforgettable. In 1982, Jessica Lange earned 2 Academy Award nominations at the same time. One was for Best Actress in Frances, and the other was for Best Supporting Actress in Tootsie. She became the first actress in 40 years to receive 2 nominations in a single year, something that hadn't happened since Teresa Wright in 1942. Tootsie ended up winning her the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress and became the second highest-grossing film of 1982, only behind E.T. She played characters who lived in opposite worlds, one dark and intense and the other light and humorous. That contrast showed everyone how powerful her range truly was, and the double nomination pulled her into the center of Hollywood's attention. But that same year brought the moment that cut deepest. While filming Frances in 1982, Jessica met Sam Shepard, and the connection grew stronger every day. Their chemistry slowly turned into something bigger, even though Jessica was still with Baryshnikov. When she finally told Baryshnikov that she was living with someone else, he hung up on her, and they didn't speak for 2 years. Jessica later called it the ultimate betrayal. Shepard's letters from that time painted a picture of deep conflict, filled with drinking, guilt, and the collapse of his first marriage. Yet he still proposed to her in December 1983 with an antique sapphire ring, and they jumped around in the snow afterward like 2 kids trying to forget how heavy their lives had become. Their relationship lasted nearly 3 decades despite the storms inside it. Jessica's Oscar win in 1983 for Tootsie strengthened her career even more. She became the first actress in 40 years to earn 2 nominations in the same year. And although some critics argued she was more of a lead in Tootsie, Columbia Pictures pushed her for supporting to increase her chances of winning. The film made more than $177 million worldwide, and the award shifted her reputation from rising actress to undeniable dramatic force. Behind the glamour, Jessica wrestled with darkness. In her early 30s, she began facing severe bouts of depression. Sometimes, she couldn't get out of bed for days. She described the episodes as overwhelming sadness mixed with restlessness that made her feel trapped. Hollywood didn't talk about mental health at the time, so she hesitated to seek help, but eventually turned to therapy and medication. The struggles made her doubt her work, especially during moments when she couldn't keep her energy steady on film sets. Later, motherhood helped her feel grounded. It softened the weight she carried and allowed her to pour her darker emotions into her characters instead of letting them consume her. Her talent only grew. Between 1984 and 1989, she earned 3 more Academy Award nominations for Country in 1984, Sweet Dreams in 1985, and Music Box in 1989. Each role showed a different form of strength and pain. In Country, she fought to save her family's farm. In Sweet Dreams, she stepped into the legacy of Patsy Cline. And in Music Box, she tried to defend her father against war crime accusations. She didn't win any of these, but the nominations proved she had reached a level of consistency that few actresses ever touch. Then, Blue Sky arrived. Released in 1994 but filmed earlier, it gave Jessica her second Oscar in 1995. She played Carly Marshall, a bipolar army wife whose instability shook her family and her community. Her performance came from something real because she carried her own history of mental health battles into the character. Critics called the role raw and fearless. With this win, She became only the second actress after Meryl Streep to win both a lead and supporting Oscar. That achievement stood untouched until nearly 20 years later when Cate Blanchett repeated it. Jessica has always said that her dark side helped her bring life to her characters. She used her own depression and emotional chaos to shape roles like Frances Farmer and Carly Marshall, giving them a depth that felt almost painful in its honesty. She knew those feelings well. They came from real experiences, and by letting those emotions pour into her work, she created performances that felt lived in rather than performed. It helped remove some of the stigma around mental health in Hollywood because she showed that vulnerability could be strength. Sam Shepard returned to her story again and again. In December 1983, while filming Country in Iowa, he pulled her outside through the cold wind and snow and dropped to one knee with an antique sapphire ring he had chosen quietly. He joked later that it was the corniest way possible, yet they both laughed out loud and hugged each other while snow fell around them. But behind the sweet moment, his letters revealed a man battling heavy drinking and guilt over the life he had left behind. Their love had started on the set of Frances in 1982 and grew too fast to control. It was wild and intense and overflowing with emotion. They had their daughter Hannah Jane on January 13, 1986, and their son Samuel Walker on June 14, 1987. The family moved between Virginia, New Mexico, Minnesota, and New York City. Jessica said motherhood was the most fulfilling part of her life, and she loved it more deeply than anything else. Both children eventually followed artistic paths quietly, without stepping fully into the spotlight. From the outside, people thought the family looked perfect, but inside there were storms that never fully settled. Jessica and Sam stayed together for 27 years, from 1982 to 2009, but they never married despite the snowy proposal. Jessica once said they were inseparable in the beginning and couldn't even go to the grocery store without each other. Sam admitted that their relationship was never meant to be ordinary. It began as a passionate love affair with no plan for a family or a long future. Yet they kept holding on because they couldn't let go. Still, his drinking and emotional volatility made the relationship hard to sustain. And over time, the cracks widened. They separated quietly in 2009 and didn't confirm it until 2011. Jessica Lange and Sam Shepard's story always starts in a place that feels bright. But very quickly, you sense something heavy moving underneath. It began in 1982 on the set of Frances, when their connection felt immediate and almost faded. Within a year, by December 1983, Shepard was already proposing, and he later laughed about how it happened in the corniest way possible while they were filming Country in Iowa. Their love came fast. It also came with shadows. Shepard wrote letters to his friend Johnny Dark, where he confessed that horrible bouts of drinking and bad behavior kept cutting into what he desperately wanted to hold together with Lange. As time went on, those habits slipped into the spaces between them until they began shaping the relationship more than any tenderness they shared. The drinking pulled him away from her again and again. It pulled him into DUI arrests, like the one in 2009 in Normal, Illinois, where his blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit, and another in 2015 in Santa Fe that was later dismissed. Each incident left more cracks, and those cracks turned into distances Lange couldn't close, no matter how much she cared. And with those distances came the affairs and the quiet, emotional retreats that Shepard admitted in his letters. He said his own patterns poisoned the relationship, and by 2004, they were staying together mostly for their children, Hannah Jane and Samuel Walker. His friend Johnny Dark once described him as a lost soul who kept searching for something he couldn't ever find. Their early years, filled with wild nights and fights and long walks down freeways, because one of them needed to escape, gradually turned into years marked by absence, regret, and a widening gap neither knew how to repair. Lange later said those early years were wild with drinking, and arguments so intense that paparazzi captured the aftermath on film. The passion that once drew them close eventually became the thing that kept shaking them apart. Lange kept moving forward in her career, which only widened the space between them. She kept rising, winning awards and diving into complex roles, while Shepard pulled back and wished for a quieter life. He told friends he wasn't the kind of man who followed a woman's career around. He would have been happy if Lange never acted again. He dreamed of disappearing into some quiet world far from Hollywood. She couldn't do that. Acting was oxygen for her, yet she loved him enough to keep trying to balance family, ambition, and the emotional storms he brought into the house. She once said everyone has their dark side, and that Shepard carried his with a sense of humor. But the weight of that darkness made day-to-day life harder than anyone outside the home could see. Their life together stretched across nearly 30 years, long enough for love to deepen even as it struggled. Their problems didn't come from one place. A lot of it came from how differently they dealt with pain. Lange talked openly about her depression. Shepard talked about retreating. She sought connection. He turned silent. He admitted to long periods of calm, followed by fireworks, and acknowledged that his moods and drinking made living with him difficult. Letters published after his death showed him describing terrible sadness and drinking that sabotaged everything he held dear. She tried therapy. He didn't. Somewhere in that difference, a divide began to form that neither of them could bridge. It became a kind of quiet truth they both lived with. The relationship held passion and beauty, but it also carried storms they couldn't outrun. At the same time, Shepard held a wish he couldn't let go of. He wanted her beside him, but he didn't want the world that fueled her. She kept working, kept traveling, kept stepping into new roles. He kept drifting, disappearing for stretches, letting the space between them grow. She said those long separations became one of the greatest challenges they faced. While he longed for solitude, she needed her work. And slowly, their lives began shaping themselves in opposite directions. Even love couldn't make those lines bend toward each other. By 2009, after 27 years together, their relationship finally reached the point where staying together no longer made sense. They separated quietly while still carrying a bond that was impossible to break. The public didn't learn about it until 2011, and even then both of them kept the details private. When they sold their Greenwich Village co-op in 2013, it marked the last legal thread tying their shared life together. The romance ended, but the connection didn't disappear. Lange once said their bond was inextricable. She meant it. Shepard buried her father with his own hands. She was the one who told him when his father died. They brought 2 children into the world together. Those moments lived inside them long after they stopped being a couple. Lange later explained that she chose herself and her children when the relationship reached its breaking point. She tried to save Shepard from his darker sides, but eventually realized she couldn't fix him. She said, "People can choose not to let things drown them." That choice carried her forward. It meant stepping away from someone she loved, because staying meant losing parts of herself. It was painful, but it was necessary, and it became one of the hardest truths she ever had to face. Not long after their separation, a new chapter opened for her. In 2009, at age 60, she stepped into the unglamorous world of Big Edie in the HBO film Grey Gardens. She spent 4 hours a day in makeup, refused to let her wrinkles be softened, and threw herself into a raw transformation. The film premiered on April 18, 2009, earned 17 Emmy nominations, won 6, and gave her the first Primetime Emmy of her career for Outstanding Lead Actress. The performance shook critics awake and reminded everyone of her range. At a time when many actresses her age were being pushed aside, Lange walked straight back into the spotlight and showed she wasn't finished. 2 years later, in 2011, she joined American Horror Story. She wasn't sure about it at first, but Ryan Murphy convinced her, and it became one of the most important turning points of her later career. As Constance Langdon, she became a fan favorite the moment she appeared on screen. Her character was supposed to be small, but the creators expanded the role after seeing what she brought to it. Her performance earned her an Emmy, a Golden Globe, and a Screen Actors Guild Award. It also introduced her to a younger generation who had never seen her earlier films. In 2012, she returned for American Horror Story Asylum as Sister Jude Martin. The season premiered on October 17th, and her performance was named one of the best of the year by TV Guide, Entertainment Weekly, and MTV. Her portrayal of a woman spiraling into madness earned her another wave of nominations and admiration. Sarah Paulson said there was a moment on set when she watched Lange mutter under her breath, unraveling in character, and it stunned her. Sister Jude became one of Lange's most iconic roles. The next season, Coven, became a phenomenon. When it premiered on October 9, 2013, it drew 5.54 million viewers, a 44% jump from the season before. It was the most watched episode in the series' history at the time. Lange played Fiona Good, the supreme witch who pulled every scene toward her, and she won another Emmy for it. The season pulled in 14 major nominations and cemented Lange as the reigning force of the show. Then came Freak Show in 2014, where she played Elsa Mars. The premiere drew 6.13 million viewers, the highest in the franchise. The season earned 20 Emmy nominations. Her performance of Life on Mars even entered music charts. It became her announced farewell to the anthology, though she briefly returned later. Across her time on the show, she won 3 Emmys, 4 Golden Globes, and a Screen Actors Guild Award. She showed the world that women over 60 could carry a series, shape a genre, and dominate the screen. As the years moved forward, Lange began stepping into a quieter life. By 76, she wasn't chasing glamour. She had already lived the highs and lows of Hollywood. She had endured a marriage that left her worn. She had survived a relationship with Shepard that stretched nearly 30 years. She lived through heartbreak, separation, and moments she later understood as necessary awakenings. Now she spends her days in a calm Pacific cottage, surrounded by houseplants and her Scottish Terrier. She avoids cosmetic procedures and embraces the lines on her face. She likes Simone Signoret's saying about aging like a fishmonger's wife, and she repeats it often because it keeps her grounded. When Shepard died in July 2017 at 73 from ALS, the loss cut deep. Even though they had been apart for years, the history between them didn't disappear. On the same day the news became public, she gave an interview and called him a remarkable man. She said no other man compared to him in maleness, a word she chose with tenderness and memory. Their bond remained in her voice, even after everything that happened. Lange has always been honest about her depression, calling it something that has moved beside her for most of her life. She admitted she never tried therapy, but instead poured her emotions into her work. She often said that her darkest feelings fed her performances and allowed her to reach depths other actors couldn't touch. The sadness and loneliness still surface, but she has learned how to live with them, how to breathe through them, and how to channel them without letting them swallow her. Through everything, her children remain her anchor. She said they tethered her to life in a way nothing else ever did. They softened her rough edges, steadied her when work pulled her in too many directions, and could make her laugh when she needed it most. They became the brightest truth in a life filled with storms. Now, when people ask what she believes, she says the same thing she learned the hard way. You can choose to be happy. You can choose yourself. You can walk away from love if staying means losing your sense of self. After everything, her life keeps showing that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is let go.